Everyone said it was a perfect arrangement. After Nathan called and asked if I'd consider moving in, I didn't hesitate. My husband had been gone 6 months by then. The quiet in our old house had begun to ache. Every corner held his absence, his slippers still under the bed, his cologne slowly fading from the bathroom cabinet. Nathan said it would be temporary. Just until I found my footing again. Candace agreed, her voice polite on the phone, her tone practiced. At first, I was grateful. I helped in the ways I knew how. Cooking, mostly. I folded Mason's little socks into tidy pairs. I remembered his favorite snacks, drove him to soccer practice, signed his reading logs when Candace was caught up with work. We smiled a lot in those early months. There were family dinners where Mason told knock-knock jokes and Nathan bragged about his new client. I listened. I laughed. I kept the dishes warm until everyone was ready. At birthdays, they always remembered to save me a slice of cake. But sometimes, when I offered a suggestion, just a harmless thought on bedtime routines or how to ease a cough, I saw it. A tiny shift in Candace's smile. Not anger, not even annoyance. Just, cold. Like a breeze coming through a barely cracked window. She would nod, sometimes hum noncommittally, and then continue speaking as if I hadn't said a thing. I told myself it was stress. I told myself not to be sensitive. Still, I noticed how her tone changed when her friends were over. How she laughed louder when I left the room. Once, she apologized to her guests because the casserole wasn't how she would have made it. I had made it, of course. None of it was cruel. Not directly. There were no slammed doors. No shouted words. Just a quiet reminder woven into her every interaction. You're useful. But never forget, this isn't your home. It started small. As most endings do. One afternoon, I showed up at Mason's school for what I thought was his band recital. I had even worn the scarf he picked out for me last Christmas. But the auditorium was nearly empty. The real performance had been moved to the night before. I hadn't known. When I asked Candace about it later, she smiled vaguely and said, "Oh, didn't I mention that?" Then she went back to chopping peppers, as if forgetting me was a matter of slicing something too thin. The instances added up. She began referring to chores I had done as if she'd done them herself. I just folded all Mason's laundry, she'd say to Nathan, and I'd be standing in the hallway, holding the empty laundry basket. She'd ask me to watch Mason tonight in a tone that didn't suggest a request, only assumption. I never minded watching him, of course. But it was the absence of "would you mind?" or "thank you" that turned the task into something else entirely. At dinner, when I shared a story, usually something small, like a memory of Nathan as a child, Candace would smile thinly, then pivot the conversation. I'd be left with half a sentence in my mouth, slowly folding my napkin in my lap. The photos on the wall began to change. My husband's face, once part of a family collage in the living room, quietly disappeared. New prints took his place, beach trips I wasn't invited to, smiling faces in matching hats, a Christmas brunch where I sat in the kitchen while photos were taken in the yard. Nathan noticed none of it. "She's just tired, Mom," he'd say, rubbing his temple. "Work's been non-stop. She doesn't mean anything by it. But tired people still say thank you. Tired people still remember birthdays." Once, I asked Candace if I could rearrange some things in the pantry to make room for the bulk rice. She said, "I think we like it the way it is." Then she adjusted a salt shaker by half an inch and walked away. I began eating earlier, alone, saying I wasn't hungry when dinner came. I stopped using the family Netflix account. I bought my own shampoo. These things happen slowly. A retreat not into anger, but into smaller spaces. The final nudge came at a dinner party they hosted for Candace's coworkers. I had helped prepare for it all week, ironed napkins, polished the silverware, made my lemon cake. When guests arrived, Candace introduced everyone, her boss, the neighbor, even the dog walker. When she got to me, she smiled and said, "This is Nathan's mother. She's staying with us for now." I had been there for 6 years. No one questioned it. They smiled politely and moved on. That night, I sat in my room with the lamp off, the lemon cake untouched on a plate beside me. I watched the shadows of people laughing downstairs, glasses clinking against countertops I had wiped clean earlier that day. It was no longer about being forgotten. It was about being deliberately unseen. Mason still came to me, though. He'd knock quietly in the evenings, ask me to proofread essays, help with job applications. He never noticed how carefully he had become my only tether to this house. Candace began talking about downsizing. About how it might be nice to have more room to breathe. She never said what, or who, was taking up too much air. I kept my things confined to the guest room. Tidy drawers. A box of letters from Nathan's childhood. A quilt I made after my husband passed, folded neatly at the foot of the bed. I dusted that room myself every Sunday. No one asked me to. I just didn't want it to look like a burden. The day Candace stopped saying good morning altogether, I wrote it down. I started a small notebook. Not of grievances, just of absences. It helped me keep track of the slow erosion. I became quieter. Candace seemed relieved. Nathan was always busy. And when he wasn't, he filled the room with small talk so I wouldn't get the chance to ask real questions. He thought his silence made him neutral. But silence, too, takes a side. Mason's graduation came with sun and applause. It was a warm May afternoon, the kind that smells like cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. I had bought a new blouse for the occasion, light blue with soft embroidery at the cuffs. It wasn't expensive, but I pressed it carefully the night before and laid it out across the guest bed like something sacred. We drove in silence to the lakeside restaurant Nathan had booked for the celebration. Candace wore a cream blazer and heels that clicked too sharply against the stone path. She didn't glance back when I trailed a few steps behind them from the parking lot. The table was long, set with gold-rimmed plates and floating candles in glass bowls. Mason's friends were there, along with a few of Candace's work contacts. Everyone smiled at me politely. No one asked me to sit near the center. I chose a seat at the far end, near the window. The lake shimmered in the distance. My fingers found the napkin and twisted it slowly in my lap. Candace was laughing with someone near the head of the table. Nathan kept checking his watch. When the champagne was poured and the desserts cleared away, Mason stood. He held his glass with both hands, his voice steady. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he began. "And especially my parents, for all their support." He turned, then, toward the far end of the table. Toward me. "But most of all," he said, "to Grandma June. You taught me what it means to show up. Every spelling test, every school form I forgot, you were there. You showed me that love isn't loud, but steady. And I wouldn't be here without you." He raised his glass. Others followed, murmuring in agreement. My throat tightened. I smiled, nodded. "Didn't cry?" "Not yet." That's when Candace stood. She held her glass lightly, her voice smooth. "Practiced." A smile on her lips, but not in her eyes. "Let's not rewrite history, Mason," she said lightly. "Your grandmother helped, sure. But she didn't raise you. Let's not confuse proximity with parenting." There were a few polite chuckles. Uncomfortable ones. She continued. "She cooked a lot of casseroles and wore those old sweaters like we're still in 1975. But raising you?" She turned toward me. Her voice softened, but not in kindness. "Let's be honest, June has always loved appearances more than substance. We've covered for her long enough." And then the sentence. "You are the shame of this family." No one spoke. Fork stopped midair. Mason's glass lowered. Nathan's face froze. I stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. I placed my napkin on the table, adjusted the strap of my purse, and walked out. The sound of my heels was muted on the carpet. No one followed. not even Mason. Outside, the wind had picked up. A few petals from the flower beds were blowing along the pavement like something newly unrooted. I didn't cry. My hands didn't shake. I walked to the edge of the lot, where the gravel met the grass, and waited until a cab arrived. When I got home, I took off the blouse and folded it back into the drawer. I didn't hang it. It didn't feel earned. I sat in the dark of my room for a long while, listening to the sound of the house settling. The next morning, I packed my things. No one asked me to. No one needed to. I found a small room for rent in a quiet neighborhood across town. One window, one chair, a twin bed. I paid in cash. Said I didn't need much. Nathan didn't call. Mason sent a short message that read, "I'm sorry." I replied with a heart, nothing more. I didn't leave the house out of anger. I left because something in me had shifted. Not snapped. Just moved, slowly, like ice separating from shore. They thought I'd fade. They thought I'd grow smaller in silence, the way women like me are expected to. But I wasn't shrinking. I was watching. I began to remember small things. Strange timings. 6 months earlier, Candace had come home late in a gray dress and carefully peeled heels, holding a stack of folders from a building downtown. I asked how the event had gone. "Oh, just a work thing," she said. "Client meeting." I had seen the name on one of the doors. Peterson and Fry, Family Law. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. But now, something whispered. That evening, I made a call. Quietly. Cautiously. To a man recommended by a friend from church. A private investigator. "I just want to know who I've been living with," I told him. "Nothing illegal. Just truth." He agreed. While I watered my window plants and made lentil soup, he worked in silence. What he found would change everything. I said nothing for 2 weeks. Not to Nathan. Not to Mason. Not even to my sister, who called 3 times before I silenced the ringer for good. I had moved into the rented room with one suitcase and a box of linens I no longer trusted to leave behind. The room was plain, white walls, a chipped dresser, a lamp that hummed faintly when turned on. The window faced a small parking lot. I watched people come and go without speaking to them. The landlady, Carla, was kind but distant. She didn't ask questions, and I offered no stories. I filled the silence with small rituals. Woke early, made tea on a single-burner stove, folded and refolded the same set of towels. I kept the curtains half drawn. A half-life, but mine. At night, I would sit in the single chair near the window, the private investigator's number folded in my lap, waiting for the courage to call again. I didn't want scandal. I wanted understanding. I wanted to see the shape of what had been beneath my roof all these years. When I finally called, his voice was calm, measured. He remembered me. "I found something," he said. "We can meet whenever you're ready." We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. He was early. The folder was already on the table when I arrived. Manila, thick, fastened with a metal clasp. He offered me coffee. I declined. "She had a daughter," he said simply. "Before Nathan. Before Mason. The name was Tessa. Born when Candace was 19. Father unknown. Raised by Candace alone for nearly 14 years. Then, gone. Not in the way families drift, but in the way paper trails end." He slid a document across the table. "Termination of parental rights. Voluntary. Final." "She walked away," he said. "Filed through a firm in Greenville. Paid cash. No custody dispute. No support arrangement. Nothing." I touched the paper gently. Her signature was there. Neat, familiar. He pulled out another sheet. This was the clause that stayed with me. He pointed. "In the event the child seeks contact in future, she is to be informed of the mother's death. Direct quote. There was video, too. A security camera outside the law office. Candace speaking to the receptionist. Her voice crystal clear. I don't want her finding me later. Just say I died. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I asked only for a copy. He gave me a flash drive and said, "You'll know what to do." I left the cafe in silence. I didn't go home. Not yet. I drove to a park instead, one with a pond and crooked benches. The wind pressed gently against the trees. Ducks drifted lazily in the shallows. I sat with the flash drive in my palm, like a stone. My son had built a life with a woman who could cut herself clean from her own blood. A woman who had stood in front of a table full of family and declared me a shame while her own story lay buried beneath manicures and guest lists. The next morning, I mailed the drive to Nathan. No note. No return address. Just a flash drive in a padded envelope. I imagined the moment he opened it. Sitting at his desk. A familiar plug into the port. A double click. The screen flickering to life. Her voice, not angry, not flustered, just matter of fact. Tell her I'm dead. That night, Candace posted a picture of herself at a yoga retreat. Smiling. Legs crossed, candles flickering. The caption read, "Sometimes, peace means letting go." 2 days later, Nathan canceled her charity gala appearance. Quietly. Without fanfare. The phone call started after that. Not to me, never to me. She called my sister. My niece. My cousin in Florida. Her voice shaking. Her words like a broken metronome. She's always hated me. She dug into my past. She's trying to destroy my family. Some believed her. At first. Until Tessa showed up. The day I met Tessa, the sky was overcast. She found me through a friend of the investigator, someone who'd grown up near Greenville, who remembered the story of a girl left behind. Tessa had spent years believing her mother had died. The lie had lived longer than her childhood. She was 20 now. Quiet in posture, sharp in the eyes. She wore her hair tied back, no makeup, a brown cardigan over jeans. When she sat across from me at the cafe, she didn't smile. I just want to see her, she said. Not because I miss her. I just need to know what she looks like when she lies. I didn't try to soften the blow. I didn't defend Candace. I offered tea. She declined. We sat for an hour without saying much. She told the court she was unfit, Tessa said eventually. Said she had no support. That my dad was gone and she couldn't handle it. She married my son 5 years later, I said. In a white dress. Surrounded by flowers. Tessa nodded once, like she had expected that. She had copies of the court papers. Screenshots of messages with the law firm. A scanned copy of the clause, if she contacts me, tell her I'm dead. She handed them over quietly, like passing stones. I want to meet Mason, she said. I want him to see what she left behind. I didn't push. I didn't plan. I just listened. When I returned to my room that night, I didn't sleep. I sat with the documents spread around me like a second skin. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. Every tick of the clock reminded me how far this had stretched, how deep it had gone. I waited 3 days before calling Mason. Would you come for lunch? I asked. Just me? He said. Yes. Just you. He came on a Saturday. Brought me flowers, unprompted. Sat at the kitchen table and asked if I was okay. I told him I was. I told him someone wanted to meet him. Someone who shared more with him than he realized. He listened. He didn't ask questions right away. He just nodded and said, okay. If you say it's important. We chose a Sunday. I knew Candace would be hosting one of her image repair brunches, Little gatherings she'd begun since Nathan stopped posting about her on Facebook. Her smiles had become tighter. Her posts more desperate. We arrived just after noon. Tessa wore a navy dress and carried a small file folder under her arm. She didn't wear a smile. Neither did I. When Nathan opened the door, he blinked as if we'd startled him. His eyes moved from me to Tessa and back again. His mouth opened once, then shut. "Is she here?" I asked. He nodded. Stepped aside. Candace stood at the kitchen counter, placing lemon slices onto a platter. There were people around her, laughing softly. She turned when she heard the door. The moment she saw Tessa, she froze. The slice of lemon in her hand slipped. Her mimosa glass tipped slightly. No one moved. Mason was the first to speak. He stepped closer to Tessa and said, "She looks like me." Candace's mouth opened, but no words came. Tessa stepped forward, opened the folder, and began to speak. "You told them I didn't exist. You told the courts you were overwhelmed. You told your lawyer to say you were dead." She laid the papers down on the dining table. "Here's the clause. The emails. The dates. The name of the judge." Candace whispered, "You don't understand." Tessa cut her off. Calmly. "No, I do. I understand perfectly. You didn't want a child. You wanted a clean life." The room was silent. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. Nathan's voice came from behind us. "I think you should go," he said. Candace looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Excuse me?" He stepped forward, slowly, his face drained of color. His voice flat. "You lied to all of us. You stood in front of my mother and said she was a shame, while hiding this. I did what I had to do." Candace snapped, her voice rising. "I was a child. I didn't have support. I was protecting myself." Tessa's voice was quiet. "No. You were deleting me." Nathan turned away from her. "Leave." Candace didn't move. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short bursts. Mason reached over and gently touched Tessa's arm. "I'm glad you came," he said. That was when Candace screamed. It wasn't words. Just a high, sharp sound. A sound of collapse. Of being seen. She pushed past us, out the front door. The mimosa spilled. The lemon platter crashed to the floor. People murmured. A few followed her outside. No one chased her. Nathan didn't look at me. He just picked up the broken glass and started clearing the table. Later that night, he called. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything." I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch between us. Then I said, "Now you know." And I hung up. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the house. Nathan came to me. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to explain. He simply arrived with a bag of groceries one afternoon and said, "You're not going to keep eating toast and applesauce every day." Then he unpacked the bag in silence: fresh spinach, eggs, a small block of cheddar, a bouquet of daisies that looked out of place on my kitchen counter. We didn't talk much that first visit. He asked if my back was still giving me trouble. I asked how Mason was adjusting to his internship. He didn't mention Candace. I didn't ask. By the time he left, the fridge was full again. That was the rhythm for a while. Small visits. Simple meals. A slow stitching of something not quite new, but no longer old. Mason came too. He brought Tessa sometimes. They were careful with each other, unsure of what titles meant now. Brother, maybe. Stranger, still. But Mason asked about her classes. Tessa offered to help him prep for interviews. They sat at my table and made small talk that was more honest than anything that had lived in that house before. Tessa had enrolled at a nearby college, psychology, she said. I want to understand people like her, she added once, softly. She didn't mean Candace exactly, but she didn't have to. Candace tried to fight, at first. Called Nathan from a blocked number. Sent him voice notes, one after another. Apologies layered with rage. Accusations woven into pleas. Nathan stopped listening by the third day. He filed for divorce quietly. There was a prenup. She had insisted on one, something about protecting her assets, back when she thought Nathan was the one who might betray her. It left her with almost nothing. She moved back to the city she came from. I don't know where exactly. I never asked. All I heard was that she was staying with a cousin while she figured things out. I doubted there was much to figure. Some stories are told by their ending. As for me, I moved again. Not far. Just enough. A small cottage near the coast, white walls, blue shutters, a porch that catches the sun in the morning. I paid the first 6 months in full with the money I'd been quietly saving for years. Money no one ever asked about. Money I'd tucked away when I realized my presence had begun to feel like debt. I filled the new space with silence and soft light. A kettle that whistled in the morning. A bookshelf lined with old paperbacks. One rocking chair. One spare blanket folded in a basket. A home scaled to my own breath. Mason visited on weekends. He brought groceries, sometimes flowers. He would sit on the porch with his coffee and talk about work, about the news, about things he couldn't say when he lived under the shadow of someone else's comfort. Tessa came too. She'd stay longer each time. Sometimes she brought questions. Sometimes she just brought herself. They didn't always come together. Sometimes they came to me when they needed different things. A place to be quiet. A place to be seen. I made them tea. Told them where the spare keys were. Left the porch light on. Nathan took longer to adjust. He was quieter. Grieving not just a marriage, but a self-image. The man who thought his silence had kept peace. He began therapy. Brought me small updates, never dramatic. Just little details. I said something real this week, he told me once. I didn't ask what. Just nodded. That was enough. There was no celebration in Candace's absence. No vindication. Just breath. I noticed how my shoulders sat lower. How my jaw unclenched. How I stopped folding napkins in the exact way she liked. I stopped buying the brand of detergent she insisted on. I bought my own again, the lavender kind my husband used to love. And in those choices, small and steady, I began to return to myself. The photos on the walls were different now. One of Mason, holding a fishing rod, grinning at the camera. One of Tessa and I, side by side in the garden she helped me start, bare soil, hopeful sprouts. No photos of Nathan and Candace's wedding. No snapshots from birthdays where my name wasn't remembered. Just light. Just color. Just newness. One afternoon, while watering the porch plants, I found a letter wedged between the screen door and the frame. No stamp. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper, written in a familiar, rushed hand. It was from Candace. I made mistakes, it began. I was scared. I wanted to be someone else. I want to talk. Maybe we can rebuild. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it in half, placed it in the bottom drawer of the hall desk, and shut it softly. There were things I could forgive. There were also things I could release. And some silences were healthier left unbroken. It was a Sunday when Tessa asked to go back. Not alone, she wanted Mason and Nathan with her. She said it plainly, without rehearsal. I need to say it out loud. Just once. Not for her, so I can stop rehearsing it in my head. I didn't tell her no. I didn't say yes either. I just asked if she wanted me there. She shook her head. You already did your part. You stayed. They arrived mid-morning. Nathan had texted ahead, not Candace, but the cousin she'd been living with. The woman answered the door with wary eyes and an unreadable mouth. "She's out back," she said. The backyard was small. A lawn with patches of dry grass. 2 folding chairs set near a rusted grill. Candace sat in one of them, smoking. The air was still. No breeze, no birds. She looked up slowly when they stepped outside. Tessa stood in front of her. Mason slightly behind, Nathan farther still, arms crossed over his chest. No one spoke for a moment. Then Tessa held up a small envelope. "Copies of the paperwork," she said. "Termination forms. Court filings. The letter you wrote saying you didn't want to be found." Candace stared, eyes unreadable. Her voice came out flat. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything," Tessa said. "I just want you to see me." Candace didn't look away. But she didn't reach for the envelope either. "You had a choice," Tessa continued. "And I'm not here to debate it. I'm just here to end the story you tried to bury. It didn't work." Candace's fingers twitched, the cigarette burning low between them. "I was 19, she said. "Alone." Nathan stepped forward then. "You were never alone," he said. "You had people. You had me." Candace looked at him, startled. "I didn't know how to explain," she murmured. "How to be 2 different people." "You didn't have to be," he said. "You chose to be." Mason was quiet the whole time. Watching Tessa. Watching Candace. His face unreadable. Finally, he said, "You told me to be kind. To be strong. But you deleted someone to look clean. That's not strength." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was hollow. Tessa placed the envelope on the patio table. Turned. Candace called after her, just once. "Tessa." She stopped. "Are you going to tell people?" Tessa didn't turn around. "They already know." Then she walked away. Back at my cottage, they were quiet when they returned. Mason went to the porch and sat. Nathan asked if I had tea. Tessa wandered to the garden and picked at the marigolds without saying much. They didn't talk about her. Not directly. Not that night. But Mason said, "I feel like I've been living with missing pages." And Tessa said, "Now you've read them." Nathan didn't say anything. He just refilled everyone's cups, then sat on the porch step and looked out at the road like it might change direction if he stared long enough. I knew then that none of them would go back. Not an apology. Not in anger. Just in absence. Candace never tried again. The letter had been her only attempt. She didn't send another. No calls. No visits. Weeks passed. Nathan moved into a small apartment nearby. Mason stayed with me for a stretch before finding a roommate near campus. Tessa visited often. Brought her textbooks. Ate quietly. Laughed more than she used to. One evening, she brought over a cake. Chocolate, from scratch. "It's your recipe," she said, shyly. "I found it in one of the books you let me borrow." We ate it on the porch. It wasn't perfect, the frosting slid, and the center was a little underbaked, but it was warm. Honest. Made with care. Afterward, when they left, I stayed on the porch. The wind had picked up slightly. The marigolds leaned together like they knew something I didn't. I thought of that moment, at the table, when Candace said I was the shame of the family. And I realized something. She'd mistaken silence for shame. But my silence had never been surrender. It had been survival. And now it was peace. I've always believed that grief doesn't end, it just changes shape. In the early days, it took the form of silence. Then routine. Then, strangely, freedom. My cottage is small, 2 bedrooms, though the second is hardly more than a sunroom with a cot and a bookshelf. I kept the windows bare in that one. Tessa likes the morning light when she visits. She says it feels honest. The days settle around me now like soft dust. I wake early, still. My body refuses to sleep in, no matter how late I stay up with a novel or a pot of tea. I stretch, I boil water, I sit by the window and watch the light change. There's no urgency, no list of tasks waiting to be met with approval. Just rhythm. The garden has taken shape slowly. I started with herbs, basil, thyme, rosemary. Then tomatoes. Then a stubborn bed of marigolds that blooms unevenly but faithfully. Tessa brought me a little rose bush last month. You need something that fights back, she said with a smile. Mason helps on weekends. He wears gloves too big for his hands and talks about software systems while pulling weeds. He's settled into himself in a way I hadn't expected. Still careful, still kind, but less hungry for approval. He asks more questions now. Doesn't rush to fix what doesn't need fixing. Nathan came last week with a gift, a second-hand radio, polished and restored. So you don't have to sit in silence unless you choose to, he said. We placed it on the kitchen counter. It hums softly most mornings, tuned to classical stations or old jazz. It fills the house without crowding it. Sometimes we talk about the past, but only in fragments. A memory of Nathan's third-grade science fair. The way Mason once pronounced chimney as chimbly. Tessa, listening, filling in her own blanks. There's no need to speak of Candace. Her absence is not a wound anymore, it's just space. I've returned to my sewing. It surprised me, the way my hands still remembered the rhythm of needle and thread. I started with pillowcases. Then curtains. I mended the lining of my winter coat. Each stitch felt like a sentence I didn't have to say. There's something sacred about doing something that's just for yourself. People in town know me now, not by name, but by habit. The woman who buys too many lemons. Who walks to the library every Thursday and always returns books early. Who sits on the bench by the bakery at precisely 2 p.m. sharing shortbread with the same sparrows. No one asks where I came from. And I no longer offer the shape of my history as a way to belong. Rebecca writes occasionally. Small notes. I never asked her to choose sides. She didn't have to. I think about you often, she wrote in the last one. And I hope you're finally breathing like you deserve to. Breathing, yes. But more than that, being. There's no grand lesson to share. No twist. No revenge. Just quiet clarity. I once believed that family was a permanent structure. A house you couldn't walk out of. But now I understand, it's more like a garden. Some parts flourish. Others wither. And some need to be uprooted for anything else to survive. One morning, Tessa brought me a small wooden sign. She had carved it herself, the letters uneven but sincere. It read, "You are the root." I hung it by the door. Not for show. Just as a reminder, that what I grew, I did with care. Even if others forgot. Even if others walked away. Now, when I lie in bed at night, I don't count what's been lost. I count what fits. A cup of tea on the windowsill. A letter waiting by the door. The steady rhythm of breath, not holding anything back. It came in the mail, not email. A pale blue envelope, thick paper, no return address. My name written in a hand I hadn't seen in months, tight, angular, the kind of handwriting that presses too hard. Candace. I knew before I opened it. I didn't rush. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter beside the bread box, let it sit there for 2 days. I didn't mention it to Nathan or Mason. Didn't tell Tessa. I went about my days as if it hadn't arrived. Watered the plants. Returned a library book. Folded the laundry, even though there was hardly anything in the basket. On the 3rd day, I opened it. Not out of curiosity. Not out of longing. Just to face it fully. The letter was 4 pages long. Written in long, winding sentences. It opened with a kind of apology. I've had time to reflect. It said that she regretted how things happened, that she never meant to cause harm. She referenced Tessa without naming her directly, called her that part of my life I couldn't face. She wrote about fear, about how the past had haunted her, about how motherhood was something she had struggled to reconcile. She spoke of Nathan. Of the divorce. It unraveled too quickly. Of Mason. He won't speak to me. I suppose I deserve that. She mentioned me near the end. I don't know if you can forgive me, she wrote. But I'd like to try. Maybe we can talk. Maybe we can rebuild something. She closed with her new address, an apartment in a city 3 hours away. No mention of work. No mention of who she lived with, or whether she lived alone. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I made tea. I sat by the window, the same place where I always start my mornings, and watched the late light slide across the neighbor's roof. What could I say to her? That her daughter was thriving? That Nathan had found stillness without her? That Mason laughed more now, leaned less, but hugged longer? That the silence she once used like a weapon now circled back to live with her? Some truths are not cruel. They're just complete. I thought of that day at the lake, Mason's graduation. How Candace had raised her glass and told the room I was the shame of the family. And I had said nothing. That silence wasn't surrender. It was memory. It was strength. Now, her letter asked me to unlock that silence. To speak. To allow something back in. But I had nothing left to offer her. No explanations. No vengeance. Just space she could no longer fill. I took the envelope, walked outside, and placed it in the small wooden box I keep beneath the porch. I don't burn things. I store them. Some things deserve to exist, even if they no longer deserve to be read. Weeks passed. She didn't write again. I began noticing new birds at the feeder. A pair of cardinals, bright and wary. Tessa said that meant something, renewal, maybe. Nathan planted mint in the corner of the garden. For your tea, he said. And for Mason's lemonade. Mason brought a camera one Sunday, took photos of the marigolds, the chipped fence, the small pile of wood I'd been meaning to turn into shelves. I want to remember this place exactly as it is, he said. I didn't ask why. I just smiled. One evening, Rebecca called. We hadn't spoken in a long time. Hi Grandma, she said. I just wanted to check in. Her voice was gentler than I remembered. Less defensive. I asked how she was. She told me she'd moved out. Found a small apartment. That she was taking time to think about things. I wasn't brave at first, she said quietly. But I'm trying now. I didn't offer praise. Just told her I was glad to hear her voice. After the call, I sat on the porch until the sun disappeared behind the neighbor's shed. The air turned cooler. The garden grew still. I thought of the letter again. How it asked for something unnamed. How it assumed I was waiting. But I wasn't waiting. I had moved on. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just with a soft, unwavering refusal to return. You are the shame of this family, she said. That moment should have broken me. Should have shattered whatever was left of the life I had built around them. But it didn't. I remember the quiet more than the words. The pause in conversation. The eyes that didn't meet mine. The clinking of silverware abruptly stilled. And then, just as I had practiced in smaller moments, when she forgot to say thank you, when she referred to me as just staying with us, when she moved my husband's photograph off the mantel, I stood, took my bag, and left without looking back. Not out of pride. Not out of spite. But because something had settled in me, slow and steady and final. I did not go home to pack. I went home to reclaim. They had taken my care, my time, my silence, and turned it into something expected, something resented. They had held the belief, quietly and perhaps unconsciously, that I would always stay, always fold, always adjust to their discomfort. They had mistaken devotion for dependence. But when I walked away that night, I walked into something wider than loss. I walked into myself. Since then, the days have been slow, deliberate. My name is on the mailbox again. My books are stacked where I want them. The soup simmers when I decide. There are no calendars scribbled with obligations I didn't choose. No closed doors that once belonged to rooms I cleaned but wasn't welcome in. I live a small life now, but it is mine. Tessa comes over with new chapters of her thesis. Mason drops by with stories from work and half-eaten pastries he insists I keep. Nathan calls more than he used to. He still stumbles sometimes, unsure of how to be without her, unsure of how long it will take to unlearn the quiet dismissals he once let pass. But he tries. That matters. One morning, I opened the drawer where I keep the letter from Candace. I read it again, not for her, but for me. I wanted to see if the words had changed. They hadn't. She still asked for something to rebuild. But the foundation was gone. And the blueprints had never been mine. I put the letter back. Shut the drawer. Later that day, I added a new picture to the wall, me, Mason, and Tessa in the garden, sun in our eyes, hands still dirty from pulling weeds. It's not a perfect photo. Tessa's blinking. Mason's shirt is wrinkled. My face is half shadow. But we are real in it. Present. There are no masks in that picture. Just breath. And light. And a different kind of family. So when I think back to her words, that cruel, cutting sentence spoken with a toast glass in hand, I don't feel what I thought I would. Not anger. Not sorrow. Just the clarity that comes from distance. Because I didn't raise a family to be preserved like glass. I raised them to be honest. And when that honesty was no longer welcome in their home, I built a better one without them. Silence was never surrender. It was the beginning of truth. And now, in the stillness of this life I've reclaimed, I can hear it clearly. Not the echo of what was lost, but the certainty of what will never be taken again.